In his book, The Web of Life, Fritjof Capra explains the importance of pattern when he explores into the meaning of self-organization, which is one major characteristic pattern of living systems. I quote, "To understand the phenomenon of self-organization, we first need to understand the importance of pattern. The idea of a pattern or organization, a configuration of relationship characteristic of a particular system, became the explicit focus of systems thinking in cybernetics and has been a crucial concept ever since. From the system point of view, the understanding of life begins with the understanding of pattern." End of quote. In order to scientifically inquire into patterns, we need to change our basic setup of scientific investigation. Capra explains, I quote, "In the study of structure, we measure and weigh things. Patterns, however, cannot be measured or weighed. They must be mapped. To understand a pattern, we must map a configuration of relationships. In other words, structure involves quantities, while pattern involves qualities." End of quote. This really involves a radical change in our scientific thinking, because traditionally Cartesian science was quantity-based and measure-oriented, while systemic science is quality-based and relationship-oriented. A truth that Capra exemplifies when looking at the properties involved in the scientific focus of both static and systemic science theory. Fritjof Capra pursues, I quote, "Systemic properties are properties of pattern. What is destroyed when a living organism is dissected is its pattern. The components are still there, but the configuration of relationships among them, the pattern, is destroyed, and thus the organism dies." End of quote. The next important point to understand how nature thinks is the cell's metabolism, the network that serves recycling. Capra succinctly elaborates in his book, The Hidden Connections. I quote, "When we take a closer look at the processes of metabolism, we notice that they form a chemical network. This is another fundamental feature of life. As ecosystems are understood in terms of food webs, networks of organisms, so organisms are viewed as networks of cells, organs and organ systems, and cells as networks of molecules. One of the key insights of the system approach has been the realization that the network is a pattern that is common to all life. Wherever we see life, we see networks. The metabolic network of a cell involves very special dynamics that differ strikingly from the cell's non-living environment. Taking in nutrients from the outside world, the cell sustains itself by means of a network of chemical reactions that take place inside the boundary and produce all of the cell's components, including those of the boundary itself." End of quote. But the most revolutionary findings are that our usual habit of dissecting parts of the whole for further scrutiny and scientific investigation does not work anymore with living systems. Why is this so? Capra pursues in The Web of Life, I quote, "Ultimately, as quantum physics showed so dramatically, there are no parts at all. What we call a part is merely a pattern in an inseparable web of relationships. Therefore, the shift from the parts to the whole can also be seen as a shift from objects to relationships." End of quote. My hypothesis is that Western culture has never, until now, applied the 8 dynamic life patterns, and that it therefore is at the border of chaos, destruction, or another kind of worldwide catastrophe, suffering from a schizoid mindset, the perversion of love into sadistic hate, rampant violence, the impudent slaughtering of minorities, famines that could easily be avoided, and generally a total lack of genuine spirituality, which by itself already makes for a large part of depression and psychosomatic disorders. What I say is that the 8 dynamic patterns of living have been respected and applied by all major tribal cultures, including the North American Indians, and that therefore they have lived peacefully. With peacefully, I do not mean an artificial Western peace concept, which is complete nonsense, as it is stuck and rigid, but a dynamic peace continuum that includes little fights and small wars as required by the dynamics of yin and yang, but that is so balanced that it will never trigger a major or global destruction. The fact that Western culture has triggered this destruction in all possible ways, economical, social, health-wise, military, ecological, and other ways, shows that the continuum balance that the 8 patterns give is completely lacking in Western philosophy, science, military policy, diplomacy, politics, and strategy. Western culture has brought about what Wilhelm Reich called the emotional plague, symbolized by the atomic bomb's mushroom. Thus, the 8 patterns could be taken as a guide concept and implemented in a new kind of lifestyle to be worked out as part of our presently evolving post-industrial global culture. That is the basic idea. I think that the 8 patterns are tremendously useful as a base layer for establishing the ground principles of a new peaceful society, instead of beginning with Adam and Eve and go time and again through all anthropological material. I have actually done this, and there is no novelty in this anymore. The 8 patterns cover all spheres of life and living.